Smart Buildings Action Cluster. Forgive me if I butcher your name, Limor Schafman, Director of Smart Buildings, Telecommunications Industry Association, TIA, and we'll welcome back Jean Rice.
Great to see you all again. So we're delighted to be talking about, fantastic, there we go. We're delighted to be talking about the possibility of becoming a supercluster. And we're going to talk about what are some of the projects that we are doing and the different perspectives that each of our organizations is bringing to the smart buildings concept and why it's so important and vital to cities. So in terms of the agenda of what we're going to be talking about, introducing ourselves, and as you see, we're going to talk about the goals, project areas, participating cities, and then we're going to offer our different perspectives. Jean?
Thanks, Limor. And I might mention that she is doing a smart buildings group. She's directing it for TIA. And so all things smart buildings, she's your, as we say in the government, your SME. She knows everything. Anyway, I just want to say that we're looking at buildings, but we're also looking at campuses as we go forward, and how do they interoperate with cities? And you know, you think maybe that's an easy thing, but actually it's something we have to figure out. And so that's one of the reasons we're putting this together. As you see, we've got all kinds of issues, ideas. We've got some smart buildings out there. We've got retrofit smart buildings. We've got new smart buildings. We have people who never thought about smart buildings. So we kind of have everyone in between that I think is going to be participating in this. What we're looking to develop, just like all the other superclusters, is action clusters. It's basically a project that involves a city, an industry, a building, and hopefully the community as well as they go forward. And the goal, obviously, is to learn and to develop some best practices that we can help and provide to others. Limor went over this earlier, but we went through our process and we've come up with our areas that we think that we will develop and where we've found the most interest from both communities and industry as well, and some universities. And as you can see, they're kind of close to a lot of the areas that we look at in the overall supercluster environment. Right now, we're going to be starting with 3 communities. One is San Mateo County, which I had mentioned before. Another is New Orleans, Louisiana. They have an energy efficiency project downtown already going, and the goal is then to see how we can get smart buildings to integrate. Another one is Inova, which is the basically the healthcare provider in the Northern Virginia area. And what they're working on is a campus that is about 130 acres, and they want to do healthcare and transportation kind of as their 2 lead smart projects as they go forward as an action cluster. We are just pulling these together and trying to get the various parties to work on it, but we do want to have more communities involved, and there are some existing projects that we've talked to that are also interested in forming action clusters. Do you want to? Sure.
So as you know, everyone here is talking about security, right? And so it's one of the key aspects. So when we're talking about a building, we're thinking about that nirvana building. We call it the quintessential aspect. And what does that mean? And so when you're looking at it from a smart aspect, we have a certain vision about it, but I won't go into that now. We'll do that in a second. But in terms of the nirvana building from a security perspective, of course, we're talking about cyber-physical, so SPS systems. And also, what does it mean? We want it to be hardened throughout. We want that technology, that security, to be built into it right from the get-go. It's designed in, just as Chris was saying earlier. And so if we're looking at the different aspects, let's be frank, okay? When we're talking about the smart building, if it's going to be integrated into the network infrastructure of a city, it is possibly going to be our weakest link. Why is that? Because people are going to be walking in and out of that building with wearing wearables, bring your own devices, all kinds of things that no matter what we're doing from a building perspective and building systems perspective that could be extremely secure, all of a sudden we're going to have all these different new kinds of elements being brought in. You can go right into the system, go into the building's going to be integrated with the city, bang, all of a sudden the city infrastructure is going to be vulnerable. So we need to make sure that everything is truly integrated. That's one of the key aspects of what we're focusing on. And of course, as I'm saying right here, integration with the municipalities. One of the first things that we had when San Mateo County heard what we were doing with smart buildings, they came up to us and said, Limor, you've got to make sure that you're interoperating and integrating with the city. We cannot be alone. And so that is, again, one of the key aspects. One of the ways that we're looking at this is we're looking at a lot of different frameworks, different ones coming out of the government, but also very specifically at the NIST cybersecurity framework, and how we can adopt it and adapt it to smart buildings. So we have a group of people within our smart buildings group already taking a look at that, and we can talk about that further. And of course, we're looking at different kinds of protocols, et cetera. So these are some of the things that we're going to be talking about with our group, and also this is something that's very important to TIA, and I welcome speaking to you further about that.
Just to give you a little idea about the perspective that NTIA has, first, this is important, come tomorrow and talk to us about it in room 148 at 9 a.m. I know it's a little early, but please join us if you can. We'd like to talk about this in more detail and what projects you might be working on. Just to tell you a little bit about the NTIA perspective, basically, last year I read all of the supercluster blueprints, and what hit me out of it was that we might have a gap, and that gap was how do we integrate with the buildings in our communities, whether they're the HUD type communities, whether we're talking the high-rise buildings. How could we do that? And luckily, we were having a meeting with TIA and talking about, smart technologies and where to go with it, and we said, this is an issue. And they said, hey, that's just what we were thinking about. So we said, okay, this is perfect. Because what we could do then is work together to see if we can come up with some plans that then people can use. And then actually, when people have autonomous vehicles or all the other things we're hoping to have happen, the buildings will seamlessly fit in.
Thank you, Jean. So here's a little bit about what we're doing at TIA with regard to smart buildings. So some of you may already know, we represent the suppliers in the telecom industry. We've been focusing on a number of different trends, taking a look at what's happening in terms of IoT, in terms of, 5G, virtualization of the networks, and of course, cyber and physical security. So we have a number of different programs that we're focusing on. One is smart buildings, we'll talk about that, but also edge data centers, taking that data center, taking out of it the hyperscale, out of it being remote, but very much it's about the densification of the cities, and taking those data centers and making them micro, right? And they're going to be in our buildings, and they're going to be in our lampposts. So one, how are we going to implement that? What needs to happen from a city densification program? But also, again, tying it back to security. How do we make sure those elements are secure? Because they're going to be extremely important, extremely vital, and also extremely vulnerable. Then we also have device and network assurance. When we're looking at that, we're looking at how do we make sure that a network is doing what it says it's going to do, or how do we make sure that an aspect of the network that is being deployed and involved does what it says it's going to do, and are there ways for us to assure that, to certify that, particularly given particular use cases. So for example, you have a hospital. A hospital is going to it's doing remote surgeries. We want to make sure that the network that's feeding that hospital, that particular building with that particular use case, is going to actually be up and running when you have that critical life at-risk kind of scenario happening. These are the kinds of things that we're looking at as an organization to see how we can move things forward. And as you see, we have a number of standards in this area. We have already over 4,500 standards. We also are focusing on a lot of policy-related issues to smart buildings as well as smart cities, and we're involved in a lot of smart city international organizations, as well as this one here with GCTC, which we're very pleased with. So a little bit about how we're thinking about smart buildings. We consider smart buildings a microcosm of smart cities. Why is that? Just as we were talking about, imagine a very high-end smart building if with all its sensors, all the systems, all the different communications networks that are going to be deployed, if we can make that work, then we can extend it out to a campus, we can extend it out to a city, and all of a sudden we've got a smart city. We've got a lot of stuff that we still need to figure out from a smart building perspective, and then we can just extend that learning out. So in terms of our building ecosystem, this is just another look in terms of the different kinds of stakeholders that we're reaching out to, and we're making part of this family that we are working with to make this happen, and you'll see later on who we have involved so far. In terms of the buildings that we're looking at all industrial and commercial buildings, as well as in terms of residential, we're really focusing on the larger building units, the multi-dwelling units, properties. Okay, this is our look at a smart building as a connected asset. Now, yes, we have basically put in every single possible technology you can think of. But I'm not saying you have to have all of this to be considered a smart building, but it brings it really home. So we're talking about a number of different technologies that you're going to have attaching to. Then you have, let me see, I have a pointer thingy. I think this is pointing. Oh, yay. Okay. So then you have, we even have the new technologies coming out, CBRS, et cetera, but of course, then you have, of course, the things that are happening within the building, right? Your Wi-Fi, your indoor DAS, your indoor small cell, et cetera. And then, but of course, you have your IoT services, your public safety services, your security, your HVAC, et cetera. And as we said earlier, why are we all here? Connecting that building to the outside world. One more minute. Oh my God. Okay. So speeding right along. All right. In terms of our buildings, another way that we're looking at buildings is this is the layers of the building. Of course, all of this. Not want to do that quite. Oh yeah. Okay. So all of this is one layer above the other. Once we get to the data, things gets really exciting, and then you can really make some power. And of course, all of these are integrated this way, this is integrated this way, and this all connects to the larger city. And there we are. What we're doing is we're building a cookbook. How do you build a smart building? How do you retrofit it? How do you do it from scratch? And there's a number of different elements of what we're going to be including in this. One of the key elements we're focusing on right now is developing a levels assessment, just like LEED, but we're doing a smart buildings levels assessment. We're hoping to integrate and work with LEED on that as well, but that's one of the things we're working on. And there we are. It takes a community, and I'm not kidding. These are all the companies and entities that are part of this working group the TIA has right now. We welcome more. We cannot do this alone. It'll be awesome to have you. So please join us. And going back to the other side, join us tomorrow, room 148, 9 a.m. Thank you.